I'm Eileen Fowler, and I'm going to be talking today about physical therapy and outcome measures for clinical trials in Duchenne muscular dystrophy. So this is an overview of the diagnosis and management of Duchenne muscular dystrophy. In our interdisciplinary clinic at UCLA, we have a neurologist, a cardiologist, a pulmonologist, physical therapist, orthotist, nutritionist, social worker, and also we have an orthopedist that we have come in as a consultant. So there's quite a few people that will evaluate these children over time. I'm going to be focusing on the neuromuscular, orthopedic, and rehabilitation management in this slide. So we have this divided up into 5 different stages. And the first 2 stages, the child is functioning quite well. So we really want to focus on this stage on education and support of the family. We want to teach them how to do range of motion exercises and talk to them about the kind of activities that the child is doing. But as the child loses more function, then we want to make sure that we see them every 6 months, and we really want to focus in on these measurements and make sure that they're not losing range of motion or need some type of treatment because of their status. And we also want to discuss equipment that they're going to need, such as wheelchairs or other kinds of mobility equipment. When we measure aspects of the children's function, we want to really look at the whole child and not just the muscle or the lungs or the heart. We want to address what's happening at the body function and structure level. We want to look at the activity level and the participation level, as well as across personal and environmental factors. So we may be looking at muscle strength, which would be more body function and structure, activity, which might be time test, how fast they can walk, and participation is what they're doing in the community, at home, or at school. So steps per day, maybe a pedometer would be something that we'll measure in that category. And then for personal environmental factors, we often get this information by giving the child or the parent some questionnaires. More specifically, getting into our measures, range of motion we measure using goniometry. So that is the picture here of this goniometer, which we would measure the 2 segments to see what the joint range of motion is and compare that to normal values. And when a child is still walking, typically we're focusing in on the lower extremities. And the ankle joint is a joint that we typically see contractures start to develop. So we'll focus in on that joint. And when the child becomes non-ambulatory and they become weaker, then we want to look more at the upper extremities and the spine, which will start to lose range of motion. So here's a physical therapist that's measuring strength. And we do this manually. Here you can see that she's stabilizing the shoulder joint, and then she's having the child hold his elbow in flexion. So she's testing the strength of the elbow flexor muscles. And this is a simple 0 to 5 scale, so it has a little bit of subjectivity. But 0 means that we don't even see a trace contraction in the muscle. And 5 means that not only does he resist when she pulls down at his wrist, but that he can give quite a bit of resistance. So that would be a normal score. And so we want to monitor this to look at, is the child responding to a type of treatment, or are they losing strength? So gross motor function would be at the activity level, and now we're looking at more function. And there is a North Star ambulatory assessment, which is developed specifically for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And we ask the child to stand, to walk, climb stairs. Here we see a picture of a slide of a child hopping on one leg. So that's very high level of function. And then we also have time tests. So we'll ask the child to get up off the floor or to climb stairs or walk down the hallway and see how long that takes them and compare that to normal values that we have for children without disability. So why do we want to do stretching and positioning to prevent contractures? Well, we want to maintain walking ability as long as possible. And if a child can't get their foot flat on the floor, for example, it's hard for them to come to a standing position. And also, for functional activities, sometimes contractures can be painful and it's hard for the child to sleep at night. and we want to keep their spine in good position. So it's really important to make sure that the joints are as supple as possible and can move well. Here's a physical therapist stretching the heel cords or the gastrocnemius muscle. And as I said, we really do focus in on this muscle as soon as the child is diagnosed. And we also provide night splints during this stage to maintain the ankle in at least a neutral position while they're sleeping. And they have daytime bracing only if they're non-ambulatory, because the braces can interfere with their normal compensatory mechanisms during walking if we brace them while they're walking. And what about exercise? Well, we know that Duchenne muscular dystrophy affects the musculoskeletal system and also the heart and the lungs. So we want the children to be active, but yet we don't want them to do activities that are too stressful. So it's really a subtle balance. We want a balance between preserving muscle function and not causing undue stress to the musculoskeletal system or the cardiac or pulmonary system. So aerobic exercise, swimming is an excellent activity. So we do recommend that all the boys learn to swim. And in the pool, gravity is eliminated. So that really is a safety measure which prevents gravity acting on the muscles and having them to do more stressful activities. And then also with cycling, that's an activity that children love to do, and that isn't as stressful as other kinds of physical activities such as running or climbing. We also want to maintain bone health, and during the ambulatory phase, the child's still walking, so they're having a lot of forces on the bone. But when they go into a wheelchair, they don't have as much force on their bone, so sometimes we recommend a standing table for them to have some force. We also do exercise for rehabilitation, and this would be if a child sustains a fracture, which is common in children who have disability and also are taking steroids, or they may have surgery for some other reason, maybe a contracture release. So during those phases, we may be doing physical therapy for rehabilitation. What about strengthening exercises? One might think if a child is weak, perhaps strengthening would be helpful. But there really isn't a way that we can do an exercise to restore the muscle function. And there is a danger of overloading the muscle and causing damage. So we want to be very careful about strengthening exercises. And the research has really shown that there's either no effect, there could be positive effect, or even negative effects. And we do know from mouse models that there can be negative effects. And the type of exercise we really want to avoid is eccentric exercise. And that is a type of exercise where gravity is really acting on the body. So such as squatting, where the knees are flexing and resisting gravity. And that causes the whole musculoskeletal unit to lengthen, but you're contracting the muscle. And it puts a lot of stress on the muscle membrane. So we don't want to be doing those types of exercises. And that happens when children are walking downhill, or if they're exercising with a weight. If they're flexing the biceps, that would be concentric, but when they're lowering a weight, that would be eccentric. There also are requirements for mobility that particular equipment can be helpful. So when the child is walking, they may need a stroller or a wheelchair for long distances if they want to go to an amusement park, or if they're at the hospital and they need to go a long distance from the car for an office visit, for example. We don't recommend walkers, and many children with developmental disabilities are given walkers when they have weakness in their legs, but their arms are fairly strong. But that's not the case in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, because their arms are also weak, and especially their shoulder girdle. So if they push down with their arms, they're also going to be putting stress on their shoulders. So if a child is having difficulty walking, we recommend instead that they might use a scooter, for example. That gives them independent mobility. It allows them to keep up with their friends and even go faster than their friends, which really makes them happy. So that's a really wonderful mobility device to have for a child who's still ambulatory. And once they're in a wheelchair, we want to have a very specially designed wheelchair which is custom for them, and we want to make sure it supports their spine because they're getting weakness in their trunk muscles as well. And there might be custom seating that we recommend for that as well. Another type of mobility device would be a mobile arm support, and that would be something that would support the forearm so that the individual will be able to type or to be able to feed themselves with that support, because they have proximal weakness, but yet they're able to use the finger function quite well if they can have some support. I mentioned scoliosis, and with steroids being the standard of care now, we've seen less need for scoliosis surgery because the spine begins to fuse during adolescence, and if we can keep the child ambulatory and stronger longer, maybe the bones will fuse before significant weakness sets in. So we do want to have certain considerations though. Posture in the wheelchair is very important. Sometimes if a child isn't supported well in their wheelchair and they have a toggle switch on one side, they may lean to that side, and that could contribute to the development of scoliosis. But if it does occur, they can have surgery to fuse the spine. But there are some functional issues with that. For example, then a child isn't able to flex their trunk forward to eat. So we want to try and avoid surgical fusion of the spine if at all possible. So that concludes the information for this module. So now I'd like you to take some time to write the answers to these questions. So the questions are: name one cause of a joint contracture. 2, what joint is the focus of stretching in the early stages of DMD? 3, what type of exercise is contraindicated in DMD? And 4, name a mobility device that is used in the late stages of DMD. So that concludes this section, and thank you for your attention.